All right, welcome back to another episode of Office Hours. The first episode exceeded my expectations on how many people enjoyed it. I was pleasantly surprised with that performance, but that is only one episode. We must trudge on. There's many more topics to talk about. So, if you're new here, this is my new show, Office Hours, where we talk about some of the biggest topics in dating, psychology, business, life, relationships, and really just modern life in general. And instead of reducing that to a 30-second to a minute-and-a-half clip, we can really extrapolate and get into detail on some of these situations. Because a lot of the conversations that are being had online today, I don't think that they're necessarily wrong, but I think a lot of them are incomplete. You miss a lot of the details and you miss a lot of opportunities to really dive deep on some of the conversations that are being had. So, today we have why most relationships were doomed from the beginning. So today's question that this title right here begs is, can someone be wrong for you, but still be exactly your type? Everything you thought you were looking for, but can they still be the wrong person? I want you to really think about this for a second, because I think that everyone watching this video has experienced this at one point in their life. Maybe it was an ex. Maybe it was someone that you never actually dated, but you had a little fling or a little situationship with. Maybe it was someone that you just couldn't stop thinking about. You know, there was chemistry, there was butterflies. Every time, their name popped up on your phone, you got a little bit more excited. You couldn't wait to see them. You thought about them constantly. And somewhere in your mind, you convinced yourself that all of this must mean something. I've never felt like this before. Maybe this is what true love actually feels like. But then, 6 months later, maybe a year later, maybe 5 years later, you look back and you reflect on the situation and you realize that maybe we were never actually right for each other. And that's exactly what I want to talk about here today, because I think that a lot of people make a major mistake in dating, and that is in thinking that attraction and compatibility are the same thing. And I don't think they are. In fact, I think those two are completely different conversations. So, today's question: can somebody be wrong for you and still be your type? And now, before anybody jumps into the comments is sitting here saying like, Jake, obviously attraction matters. I agree. I know that. I don't think that attraction is overrated. I don't think that attraction is shallow in any way. I don't think that attraction is something that we should ignore. Attraction matters. It matters a lot. But I also think that we've accidentally started treating attraction like it's evidence. Almost like the stronger we're attracted to somebody, the more we tend to convince ourselves that they're the right person. And I don't know if that's actually true. Think about how we talk about relationships. Oh, we had such a spark. The chemistry was unbelievable. I've never felt butterflies like that before. We just clicked. There was something there. And now you'll notice, those are all just descriptions of attraction. None of those things tell you whether two people should actually build a life together. So we have attraction versus compatibility. This is the main topic here today. The difference between these two is so important for you to understand in terms of even being able to find a successful relationship, or even knowing if someone is right for you. Because I think attraction only answers one question: do I want this person? While compatibility answers a completely different question: can we build a life together? And now I know those sound similar, but they're not at all. Because one of those is about emotion and the other is about reality. One of those happens almost instantly, but the other, that can take months, sometimes years to even be able to discover. And now this is why I think that so many people end up in relationships that were probably doomed right from the beginning. It's not because they ignored red flags. It's not because they're a bad person. Not because they were stupid, but because they assumed that if attraction was strong enough, that everything else would just kind of figure itself out. And unfortunately, life doesn't work that way. So, the biggest dating mistake. Imagine you meet somebody tomorrow. They're attractive, they're confident, they're funny, you enjoy being around them. The conversations They flow effortlessly. You guys have some great chemistry together. Your friends tell you how, they've never seen you smile like this before. Every date that you guys go on, it leaves you wanting another one. Sounds perfect, doesn't it? Sounds like, oh, what could be better? Now imagine 6 months later, you completely disagree on money. One of you wants children, the other doesn't. One of you wants to go and see the world and travel the world, but the other wants to stay close to family forever. One of you avoids conflict, whereas the other needs to talk through every problem immediately. And now suddenly, the chemistry that you guys have hasn't disappeared, but the relationship starts to feel harder and harder day by day. And this is where people usually end up saying something like, oh, I don't know what happened. And personally, I think I know what happened. The attraction didn't disappear, but compatibility finally showed up. So today, that's exactly what we're going to break down. What attraction actually is, and what compatibility actually is. Why so many people tend to confuse the two, and why understanding the difference between the two will probably change how you think about dating as a whole. Because if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this episode, it's that just because someone is easy to fall for, that doesn't mean that they're going to be someone that's easy to build a life with. And those are two completely different things. So let's get into it. All right, what attraction actually is. So before we can even begin to compare attraction versus compatibility, I think we need to define what attraction actually is. Because just like the phrase nice guy from the last episode, I think attraction is one of those words that everybody uses, but very few actually define. Most people, they just know it when they feel it. You look at somebody, you spend time around somebody, you laugh at their jokes, you hear them talk, and then somewhere along the way, something clicks. That's how attraction works for most people. You can't explain why, you just know it happened. And here's what's interesting about this. I don't think that attraction is a decision, I think it's a reaction. Because if attraction was just a choice, something that you were freely able to choose, then nobody would ever end up being attracted to the wrong person. Nobody would be hung up on an ex. Nobody would ever look back years later and be like, what the fuck was I thinking? But we've all done it. Every single one of us has done it because attraction doesn't ask permission. It just shows up. Now, attraction is not logical. I want you to think about this, especially us guys. We've all had this happen at some point. Imagine one of your friends shows you a picture of a woman that he thinks is like unbelievably attractive. And you look at this picture and you're like, really? Are we looking at the same person here? You kind of chuckle a little bit. You're like, what the fuck is this guy thinking? And now you've also probably had the opposite happen where someone caught your attention. You thought they were incredibly attractive. And now your friends don't understand it at all. They're sitting here like, dude, what do you see in her? And now in this situation, who's right? The answer is nobody's right. Because attraction is not objective, it's subjective. It's personal, it's emotional. It's influenced by your experiences, by your personality, by your preferences. It's even influenced by the stage of life that you're in currently. That's why two people can meet the exact same person and walk away with two completely different opinions on what they think about them. One feels absolutely nothing, the other can't stop thinking about them. Same person, two completely different reactions. So you don't choose who you're attracted to. So here's a question. Can you force yourself to be attracted to somebody? I want you to really think about this. And I'm not asking, can you learn to appreciate somebody? I'm not asking, can attraction grow more and more over time? I'm asking if you can just simply decide like, you know what? I'm going to be attracted to this person. Because I don't think you can. It's not possible. Because attraction does not respond to logic. If it did, dating would be incredibly easy for everybody. You just make yourself a checklist. They're loyal, they're kind, they're successful, they're emotionally mature, they're honest. Perfect, we're all good now. Guess I'm attracted now. But that's not how it works. We've all met incredible people that, we'd love to see somebody in our life end up dating, whether that's a best friend, a brother, a sister, whoever it may be. We personally weren't attracted to them, but does that make them any less valuable? No. All it means is that attraction is not something that you can negotiate. Now, chemistry is a feeling, and I think chemistry is probably one of the most misunderstood words in dating, especially today. People will say like, oh, we have so much chemistry, but what the fuck does that actually mean? Usually what they're describing is just how somebody made them feel. The conversation flowed well, time disappeared, the flirting felt effortless. There wasn't awkward silences throughout the date. They left the date wanting another one. That right there is chemistry. And chemistry is amazing. Seriously. I hope that every single healthy relationship out there has chemistry. But here's where I think people make a huge mistake again. They treat chemistry as evidence. If it feels good, it must be right. And I don't think that's necessarily true, because something can feel good, something can feel incredible, but not be sustainable in any way. And what this can lead to is the butterflies fooling you. So let's talk about the butterflies. People love butterflies. Movies love butterflies. Songs love butterflies. Social media loves butterflies. We've almost been taught that, if they're not present, then something must not be right. Something must be missing. And personally, I don't know if I really agree with that. Because butterflies are not necessarily proof that somebody is right for you. A lot of times, it's just proof that somebody is emotionally significant. And now, that significance can come from a multitude of things. It can come from excitement. It can come from uncertainty. It can come from mystery. It can come from the fear of losing somebody. Butterflies don't tell you why you're feeling them. It just tells you that you're feeling something. And if you don't understand what that something is, that's where you start to get led down the wrong path. So intensity does not equal compatibility. And this is probably the biggest point of this entire first section that we're talking about here. Because intensity with somebody does not mean that you're compatible. Because I think that a lot of people confuse the strongest emotions that they've ever felt with the strongest relationship that they've ever had. And those two are not the same thing. Some of the most intense relationships that people experience are also some of the least healthy, some of the most unhealthy possible. Constant breakups, constant making up again after the breakup, constant uncertainty, every day feels dramatic, every argument that you have feels like your relationship might end, and everything that I just listed creates incredibly intense emotions between two people. But intensity is not always a sign of something healthy. Sometimes it's a sign that the situation you're in is unstable, which this leads me to the first date problem. Imagine you go on a first date. The conversation feels effortless. You guys are laughing, you're flirting, hours go by, you don't even check your phone, time's flying. And now you leave that date thinking wow, that was the best date I've ever been on. But now let me ask you something. What did you actually learn about that person? Probably not a lot. Probably not as much as you think. You learn that they're enjoyable to spend an evening with. That's valuable. But you didn't learn how they handle stress. You didn't learn how they communicate during conflict. You didn't learn how they manage money. You didn't learn what kind of parent they'd be. You didn't learn how they react when life gets difficult. And in other words, you learned whether you enjoyed the interview. You didn't learn whether you'd actually want to hire them or not. And that's where I think everyone starts to get ahead of themselves, especially in today's day and age where everybody wants to move at light speed in the dating process. Nobody wants to give, a relationship with a person time to grow before they get into something serious. All of the attraction that you have with that person, all that does is give you enough information to become interested. But again, it doesn't tell you whether you can actually build a life with that person. So now that we've talked about attraction, let's get to the part that nobody's really excited to discuss, and that's compatibility. Because I think that compatibility is actually what determines whether attraction has anywhere to grow or not. So, attraction starts relationships. And at this point, I don't think that attraction is the enemy in any way. In fact, I think attraction is one of the best parts about dating. It's exciting. It's unpredictable. It's the reason that somebody catches your eye across the room. It's the reason you want another date. It's the reason your phone all of a sudden matters so much more because you're waiting for their name to pop up. Attraction is fun. I don't think anybody should be sitting here pretending that it isn't. The problem is not attraction. The problem is what we expect attraction to do. Because I think we've accidentally given attraction a job that it was really never designed to perform in the first place. We've started to expect attraction to predict the future. Almost like because we're incredibly attracted to somebody, that now somehow tells us that we're going to be happy together 5 years from now. And personally, I don't think attraction can answer that question, because attraction only starts a relationship. It does not sustain it. So, attraction just opens the door. Think about almost every relationship or, interaction that you've had with a woman out there. What got your attention first? It probably wasn't that this woman was a great communicator. It probably wasn't the way that they handle conflict. It probably wasn't their financial habits or how they respond under pressure. No, it was something much simpler. You noticed them. You enjoyed talking to them. You liked the way they carried themselves. You liked how they made you feel. That's attraction. And that's exactly what attraction is supposed to do. It's supposed to create curiosity, nothing more. It opens the door and it invites you inside. But opening the door is not the same thing as building the house. And I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is they confuse the invitation with the destination. It doesn't work that way. So I want to give you guys an analogy. I have the interview analogy. And here's the way I think about it. Imagine you're interviewing for your dream job. The interview goes unbelievably well. Everybody's smiling, the conversation flows, the hiring manager's laughing at your jokes, and you leave the interview thinking like, damn, I crushed that. But does that mean you already have the job? No. All it means is that you've earned the opportunity to continue the process. And dating works the exact same way. The first date, the first kiss, the first time you have sex, the honeymoon phase, those are all interviews. They're introductions. They're opportunities to learn something about the person that you're having these interactions with. But these are not proof that you have found a life partner. And I think a lot of people, they stop asking questions because the chemistry feels so good. They assume that they've already found the answer when really all you've done is started gathering information. And I have another analogy for you. The house analogy. Imagine you're buying your first house. Pull into the driveway. House is beautiful. Exact style you've always wanted. Perfect neighborhood. Beautiful kitchen. Fat backyard. You got room for a putting green. You could put a pool back there. Do whatever the fuck you want. Amazing house all around. And you immediately think like, wow, this is the one. This is it. And now imagine someone says, all right, great. Let's skip the inspection. Yeah, we'll just skip it. Everything looks good, right? Would you? Would you skip the inspection? Probably fucking not. And the reason you wouldn't skip it is because you understand something very important. Loving what you can see doesn't tell you anything about what you can't see. Doesn't tell you anything about the foundation, about the plumbing, about the electrical, about the roof. Doesn't tell you anything about all of the things that actually determine whether the house is actually a blessing or a motherfucking nightmare. And relationships aren't very different from this. Attraction is walking through the front door. Compatibility is figuring out whether the foundation can actually support the life that you're looking to build. And now, feelings change. And here's something I don't think a lot of people really want to hear. Feelings change. That's not because love isn't real, not because attraction just disappears overnight, but because emotions naturally fluctuate. Some days you'll feel incredibly close with your partner. Other days you're going to feel incredibly stressed. Some weeks life is exciting. Other weeks you're fucking exhausted from work. Because real relationships are not lived on fucking vacation. They are lived on regular Tuesday morning. They're lived when somebody forgot to unload the dishwasher. When one of you had a terrible day. When money gets tight. When somebody gets sick. When plans fall apart. That's where the relationships are actually tested. Not during the honeymoon phase. Not when everything is all fucking roses and butterflies. Everything's all good. It's tested after it. And the thing that you need to understand about this is chemistry can't solve everything. Think about the biggest arguments that couples have. Money, trust, communication, family, children, career, priorities. None of those problems that I just listed get solved because two people have great chemistry with each other. Now, chemistry might make you even ignore those problems for a little while. But eventually, real life is going to catch up. And when it does, you're no longer asking yourself, do I enjoy being around this person? You're asking yourself, can we solve problems together? Those are two completely different conversations that you have to have. Which leads me to the real question here. And I said this in the last episode, but it's going to become a common trend throughout the Office Hours show. Maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. Too many of you are asking yourselves, Am I attracted to this person? When really, you should probably be asking yourself, what happens after attraction? Because eventually, the butterflies calm down, the excitement becomes normal, the relationship becomes a part of everyday life. And that right there, that's exactly where compatibility begins. Not on the first date, not during the honeymoon phase, but when real life finally shows up. So, if attraction just gets you through the front door, gets you the invitation, what determines whether two people actually stay together? And I think the answer has very fucking little to do with butterflies. Let me tell you, I think it has everything to do with compatibility. So let's talk about it. What compatibility actually is. And now after everything that we've talked about so far, let's finally answer the question, what actually is compatibility? And personally, I don't think compatibility really has to do anything with how exciting somebody is. I think it's much, much simpler than that. I think compatibility is simply just when two people's lives fit together. And not perfectly, because perfection doesn't exist, but well enough to where you can actually build something together. Because here's what I've noticed. A lot of people date for the relationship that they're in today. Very, very few people date for the life that they're trying to build together tomorrow. Because the people that are looking toward tomorrow, that asks a much more difficult question to answer. Can we build a life together? That is a much harder question to answer than, do I just enjoy being around this person? That's some fucking flimsy, willy-nilly bullshit that ain't gonna sustain anything. Attraction lets you just focus on today and right now, but compatibility makes you think about the future. That's why people want to ignore it. So let's get into a few of the things that really go into compatibility. The first one is shared direction. Imagine two incredibly good people. Neither one is toxic, neither one is insecure, neither one is manipulative, neither one's a bad partner, but one of them, they have this big dream that they want to live in New York City. They've been dreaming of it their whole life. This is what they want to do. But the other one, they want to live in a bumfuck small town out in the middle of Iowa. One wants 5 kids, the other doesn't want any kids. And now what's wrong with this picture that I've painted here for you? The answer is nothing's wrong. Those two people are completely correct in wanting to have their own preferences for the direction that they want to head in life. That's what makes compatibility so difficult to find. Sometimes relationships don't end because somebody failed or somebody fucked up or somebody did something that was terrible. Sometimes they just simply end because two good people wanted two completely different lives. And I think that's a very hard truth to have to accept, because it's much easier to have to move on or forget about somebody when you've made them the villain. We would almost always rather have that other person be the villain because it's easier, it's cleaner. You can move on much quicker. But sometimes life just isn't that simple. Sometimes life is not enough to overcome two people that are moving in opposite directions. And next, who are they under pressure? And here's something that I've thought about a lot. You don't actually know somebody until life gets difficult in some way. Anyone can be patient on vacation. Anyone can communicate properly when everything's going well. Anyone can be generous when money's not tight. Anyone can be affectionate when there's no stress going on. But that's not how life works. Real life is pressure. Real life is uncertainty. Real life is risk that you could lose your job for some reason one day. Real life is having a sick parent. It's financial stress. It's unexpected setbacks. All of those things right there, that's where character shows up. Character doesn't show up when you're fucking sitting on a beach in Tulum. So compatibility is not measured on your best day. It's measured on your worst day. How does this person handle disappointment? How do they argue? Can they apologize? Can they take accountability? Or do they just shut down? Do they blame everybody else? Do they solve problems, or do they become the problem? You'll notice these are not attraction questions. These are compatibility questions. And another one for you. Can you solve problems together? And one thing that I think people massively underestimate is how much a long-term relationship is really just solving problems together. And now they don't have to be like massive, groundbreaking, life-changing problems, but a long-term relationship is just a string of small, simple daily problems that you solve together. Think about it. Whose family are we going to spend Christmas with? Who's cooking dinner? Where are we going to live? Are we going to split finances? Who's going to take care of what? What school do we want our kids to go to? How are they going to get to and from school? Am I picking them up or are you picking them up? How do we handle disagreements? And now none of those conversations are exciting. And me telling you that you need to be thinking of those conversations, that doesn't go viral on social media. That's why people don't fucking talk about it. But those are the conversations that relationships are actually made of. The movies that you all grow up watching, they end right after two people kiss happily ever after. But in real life, that's when the relationship starts. That's when shit begins. Compatibility is just asking, can we solve life's problems together without becoming each other's biggest problem? Because if you're your spouse's biggest problem, you guys are heading for one place. And that is a courtroom to decide fucking child care and the split of all of your belongings. You're heading for a divorce. Peace versus excitement. It's another one you need to think about. And people talk about excitement all the time, but very few people talk about peace. And personally, I think peace is one of the most underrated attributes of a relationship. And I'm not talking about boredom. I'm talking about peace. The two of those are very different. Peace is knowing where you stand. Peace is trust. Peace is emotional safety. Peace is not wondering every weekend whether you guys are going to break up or not. Peace is not checking someone's location because you don't trust them. Peace is being able to disagree without questioning whether the relationship is going to be over or not. And here's the interesting part, especially with women. And this is why we talk about men don't want a woman with a past. Because if a person has spent years in just chaotic relationships left and right, peace can feel unfamiliar. Peace can feel uncomfortable. Women especially will mistake peace for boredom. Especially the women that have had chaotic shit all throughout their past. And this is not because healthy relationships are boring. It's just because chaos became normal. And when chaos is fucking normal, there's no room for peace. These women will get bored and they will create chaos. So make sure that you do not confuse the two. Having peace in your relationship is not boring. It's what you should be striving for. And the last example I'm going to have for you is the relationship stock market. And I want to explain compatibility the same way I would kind of explain investing. And really because I think the two are surprisingly similar. Imagine a friend tells you, hey man, I found this stock. Every single day it goes up 20%, but then it draws back 30%, but then the next day it goes up 40%, then it loses half its value, and then it doubles. Every week is insanely chaotic. Some people would look at that chart and think, wow, that's pretty exciting. But an experienced investor would look at that chart and be like, that's a lot of volatility going on there. And now compare that to another investment. This investment doesn't create headlines. It doesn't double overnight. It grows steadily. It weathers the downturns. And it consistently moves in the right direction over years. Which one is probably going to build you wealth? The stable one. And I think relationships work a lot like that. Some relationships are emotionally volatile. The highs are unbelievable and the lows are devastating. Everything feels intense. Everything feels urgent. Everything feels dramatic. And a lot of people, they'll mistake that intensity for passion when really it's just instability. Some of the healthiest relationships that I've seen usually are not the loudest. They're the most consistent. And not because they're perfect, but because both people keep showing up day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. That's what compatibility looks like. So now that we've talked about attraction, we've talked about compatibility, there's one question left. If compatibility matters so much, why do most people spend the majority of their time chasing attraction? And I think the answer to this question has a lot less to do with dating and a lot more to do with just basic human psychology. So let's talk about it. Why do we keep choosing the wrong people? And everyone is guilty of this. Successful people, intelligent people, emotionally mature people. Why do all of these types of people keep ending up in relationships that clearly weren't meant for them? And personally, I don't think it's because they're stupid. I think it's because attraction is immediate and compatibility is delayed. You know whether you're attracted to somebody within minutes. Sometimes it's seconds. Compatibility, that takes time. Sometimes it's months. Sometimes it's years. And unfortunately, most people become emotionally invested long before compatibility has had enough time to be able to reveal itself. And that's why breakups hurt so much, because you didn't just lose the relationship, you lost the future that you imagined. Which leads me to the future you fell in love with. And here's something that I think almost everyone has done. You meet somebody, you go on a few dates, they go really well, and before you realize it, your imagination starts filling in the blanks. You picture vacations together, you picture meeting each other's families, moving in together, marriage, kids, growing old together. And now none of those things have actually happened, but emotionally, they start feeling real. And I think this is very dangerous because sometimes we're not actually attached to the person. We're attached to the future that we've imagined in our head. And there's a huge difference between those two because the relationship that's in your head is usually much more compatible than the relationship that's actually happening. Got another point for you. Red flags usually start small. And people will always ask me like, oh, how do people ignore red flags? Like they're right there. How'd you not see it? And honestly, I don't think people ignore them. They know they're there. They just choose to minimize them. They sit there and they'll tell themselves like, oh, maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe it'll get better. Maybe they're just stressed. Nobody's perfect. And to be fair, nobody is perfect. Every relationship requires a degree of grace. Every relationship requires some patience. But I think there's a massive difference between accepting imperfections and ignoring incompatibilities. If someone leaves, some dirty dishes in the sink, that's an imperfection. If someone refuses to communicate every time there's conflict, that's a compatibility issue. If someone forgets your birthday once, that could be a mistake. But if someone consistently makes it feel like your needs don't matter, that's a pattern. And one of the biggest mistakes that people make is confusing patterns with exceptions. So with everything that we've talked about here, what are the right questions? What are the questions that you should be asking yourself when you're looking for a partner? And instead of asking yourself the questions that most people ask, like, are they my type? Do I like them? Am I attracted to them? We should be asking ourselves better questions. Questions like, can I trust this person? Can we disagree without disrespecting each other? Do they take accountability when they're wrong? Can we solve problems together? Do they make my life more peaceful or more chaotic? Do they encourage me to become a better version of myself? Would I be proud if my son was in a relationship with this person? Would I be happy if this is who my daughter became? And I think those questions tell you a lot more than, the little fucking butterflies in your stomach do. Because the butterflies, they're gonna fade. Character does not fade. Character is there to stay. So after everything that we've talked about today, I don't think that the lesson is to stop caring about attraction. I don't think that the lesson is that chemistry is not important. I don't think the lesson is that you should date somebody that you're not excited about. I think the lesson is balance. Because attraction and compatibility, they're not competing with each other. They're doing different jobs. Attraction gets your attention. Compatibility determines your future. And if you can understand the difference between those two things, I genuinely believe that you will make better relationship decisions for the rest of your life. So, let's finish with what I think the biggest takeaway of this entire conversation is here today. Attraction opens the door, compatibility builds the home. Should attraction matter? Absolutely. I don't think anybody should force themselves to date somebody that they're not excited about. I don't think anybody should settle. And I definitely don't think the answer is, oh, well, they're a good person, so I guess I'll make it work. That's not fair to either person. Attraction matters, it always will. But here's what I hope you remember after today's conversation. Attraction and compatibility were never competing with each other. They were doing two completely different jobs. Attraction gets your attention, compatibility earns your commitment. Attraction starts the story, compatibility determines whether that story has another chapter or not. And I think that somewhere along the way, modern dating has become obsessed with beginnings. The first text, the first date, the first kiss, the first time you have sex, the butterflies, the spark, the honeymoon phase. That's what we celebrate. That's what gets posted on Instagram. That's what ends up in the movies. Nobody makes a movie about two people learning how to communicate during a disagreement. Nobody posts on fucking Instagram, hey guys, we had a super healthy conversation about our finances today. But you know what? That's what long-term relationships are made of. They're not one incredible moment. They're 1,000 ordinary moments. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about love is that the right relationship is supposed to feel exciting every day. And I don't think that's real. Some days are exciting. Some days are ordinary. Some days are difficult. Some days are frustrating. Some days you're tired. Some days life gets in the way. And I don't think that's a sign that you're with the wrong person. That's just life. The question isn't, can we avoid the hard seasons of life? The question is, who is it that I want standing next to me when these seasons inevitably arrive? Because eventually, Every relationship is going to get tested, and not by romance, but by reality. Bills, careers, children, health, loss, stress, disappointment, and all of the things that I just listed don't ask whether two people have amazing chemistry with each other. They ask whether two people know how to face life together. And that's where compatibility becomes priceless. You can't buy it. So if I were talking to my younger self, or honestly, really anybody watching this video, I don't think that I would tell you, go find the person that, puts the fucking butterflies in your stomach. That's not what I would tell them. I'd probably say, go find the person that brings out the best version of you. Find somebody who challenges you. Find somebody who tells you the truth. Somebody who celebrates your wins without competing with you. Somebody who makes hard conversations easier instead of avoiding them. Somebody who respects you enough to tell you when you're wrong. Somebody whose values make you want to be a better person. Because eventually, looks change, jobs change, circumstances change, life changes, character usually doesn't change. And that's why I think character is one of the safest things that you can build a relationship on. So maybe the goal is not to find the most exciting person that you'll ever meet. Maybe the goal is to find somebody that you can build an exciting life with. Those are two completely different things. One is dependent on the person, the other is dependent on the partnership. And I think that's a huge mistake that a lot of people make. They're sitting here waiting to find this person that will create the life that they want, instead of finding somebody that will build that life alongside them. So, can someone, be absolutely fucking wrong for you, but completely be your type? 100% yes. Because attraction can tell you who catches your eye, but it can't tell you who should be in your future. Only time, only character, and only compatibility can answer that. So next time, before asking yourself, are they my type? You should be asking yourself, can we build a life together? Because attraction, that may convince you to start the relationship, but compatibility is what's going to give it a chance to last. So thank you for coming to Office Hours today. I think it was another great episode. Excited to see where things go from here, and I'll see you whenever I feel like it.